everybody, to Ravenstar's Witching Hour. I'm your host, Solaris BlueRaven. I'm here with my wonderful guest, Mike Pipher. Mike, you with me?
Yes.
Excellent. And I wish I could cure your cough. What are you taking for it?
Absolutely nothing. I've tried everything. Cough syrup doesn't help.
Honey?
Although,
Tea and honey.
I'm allergic to honey. I almost died from an instant allergy once to honey.
Oh, no. Oh.
It was amazing. I was at Wendy's. They had this new honey burger, and just one bite, and my throat closed up. They had to rush me to the emergency room and give me about 8 shots in the neck. And I used to love honey.
Wow,
but,
that's
speaking
weird.
of that, I've got a bottle of cough syrup right here.
You
so
do?
let me just. I didn't even think about it. I'm going to
Okay.
sip water. Let me sip this down quick.
I wish I could cure you. I'm just, I've had dry coughs like that before, and they haven't been able to diagnose it. And I don't smoke or anything, so.
I don't either, but
Yeah.
I'm around a lot of people that do, and I swear secondhand smoke is going to kill me. Well, I've got, every time I'm on with you, I like to share something brand new, and I've just unearthed an amazing piece of information, and it has to go back to that film last Thursday that I mentioned, Sir, Yes, Sir, in the Vietnam War.
Mm-hmm.
There was a gentleman at the show viewing that's a year older than me, so he was 64, and he graduated from Bing-hamton High School like Rod did. And Helen Foley, who was Rod's teacher, of note, they made a Twilight Zone about her, he did. There was this young man there talking, and he said back in 1968, Rod came back to the high school to do the commencement speech. And every time he came to the high school, which was very frequently, he would go visit his teacher's room and visit with all the students and just sit there and talk for an hour or two. And so this young man had the privilege of, talking to Rod there in the classroom. And the Vietnam War came up. And, of course, in 68, it was, really in its peak. And this gentleman proceeded to tell Rod that on State Street, a few blocks from the hospital, that they had a building called the State Street Draft Center. And this young man was, opposing the draft, and a lot of the other students were too. And he told Rod that there was a underground railroad that traveled through Bing-hamton, New York to Canada for people to escape to Canada and avoid the draft. I never knew this. And he said that Rod was so impressed that he wrote a large check and handed it to this young man for that effort.
Oh, nice.
Now, what ties it in even more so that I can verify the accuracy of it, in Anne Serling's book that she wrote 3 years ago, My Dad as I Knew Him, Rod Serling, there's a mention of a letter that she found in her father's letters that talks about thanking him for helping him to escape to Canada.
Wow.
So I always wondered just how that tied in, that letter. The guy was still living in Canada at the time he wrote that letter to Rod. And so it's just amazing to find the source of how that happened.
Mm-hmm.
I had never heard of that part of the local history at all.
Well, that's really interesting. Yeah, that's kind of cool, isn't it? Yeah, and you mentioned something about a play that went really bad that Rod wrote one of Rod Serling's plays. Was it Anne that rewrote it or something?
Oh, yeah. It was the Twilight Zone. There's a lot of Twilight Zone live productions being done around the country when I do a search on the internet. And 2 years ago at our Maine State University of New York campus, about a mile from my house, they had Twilight Zone live. And so I went to the opening night, and they did 2 episodes, Monsters Ado on Maple Street and Dust, which is a lesser-known episode. And Anne Serling was involved with it. She was there for the Sunday afternoon screening to talk to the people. But half hour before the end of the show, or the show was to go on, I'm sitting out in the wings waiting to take my seat. And I heard the young man come out and greet some of his friends. And he says, "You're not going to believe this. You traveled all the way to see me, and they just cut my part." And this is like 30 minutes before showtime. And so I listened very intently. And they decided to the last minute to take out all the violence from the end of the show. Now, Monsters Ado on Maple Street was one of the most famous episodes. It's on every top 5 list. And most people know, about, the aliens sitting here observing our people in the small community, and how they didn't need to do anything to take over our world. They were just going to create panic within the people and make themselves to be the monsters, and we would destroy ourselves. And so the ending was very graphic in the episode. They were hitting people in the head with baseball bats and rocks and burning down houses. And so, right before the show goes on live, they changed it all to just a bunch of kids on stage running around chasing each other. Made absolutely no sense whatsoever. And so the other episode, Dust, they also ruined because it was a story of a 8-year-old girl coming into town in the old Western Mexican days, and she's run over by a wagon and killed. And it turns out the young Mexican person was drunk, and so he's being accused of murder, and they were going to hang him. Well, they turned it into a comedy.
Oh, brother.
Now, how do you make a comedy out of the death of an 8-year-old girl because somebody was drunk? And they took the lead character and just made him laughing hysterically through the whole show. And so, God forbid that, other productions around the country are doing the same. If you're going to do Twilight Zone live, do it live. Right. Do the original script. Now, a prime example of the goodness of the flip side of that is at my program next week, I'm showing an episode of Walking Distance about our local recreation park, the merry-go-round, going to your hometown, a classic, considered one of the best episodes. And our PBS station here, back in '09 for the 50th anniversary of the premiere of The Twilight Zone, did a 90-minute live production of 2 episodes, Walking Distance and Mirror Image, about the bus station here and the doppelgangers taking over our world as well. So they were wonderfully done. There were a few differences in dialogue, very simplistic stage sets obviously being done live, but they kept to the true origins of the story. Now, I know from my dealings with Carol Serling, Rod's widow, through the 8 years of the Foundation days in the 80s and 90s, that Rod wrote probably 20 different drafts of every script that ever aired for Twilight Zone. So you can accommodate a few lines of dialogue that are slightly different because every draft through the different stages right through the final production draft are a little bit different. But I am actually showing for the first time the Walking Distance segment because it is time travel. I mean, the guy's, filling up his tank with gas, and he decides to walk down the street to his hometown, which they call Homewood in the episode, which was really Binghamton. And as he's walking, he walks back into time so that when he walks into the pharmacy and sits down for a malted milkshake or an ice cream, whatever, he's back in time to when he was an 8-year-old. He just doesn't know it yet. So I fit right in with time travel. And I thought we would show that because very few people ever heard of it unless you were here and saw the live production that aired once. Oh, my God. And then the following year, they aired the show again with The Monkey's Paw, which is a classic horror one-act play. So they did Walking Distance and Mirror Image and then that thing for Halloween. So it only aired twice here. And everybody I've ever talked to at my programs had never seen it. So we're going to fit that in. And then we're showing the original 1-hour pilot for Twilight Zone that never aired as part of the Twilight Zone series. And that was a time element that Rod had written in the mid-'50s. And that's what he sent to CBS as a proposal for the Twilight Zone series. And it was rejected. It has to do with a character going back and forth in time to Pearl Harbor. And he's talking to a psychiatrist about the problem, and he literally is going back and forth in time, and he's actually killed back there. And then later, when the psychiatrist comes to the bar for a drink, he sees the picture of the guy on the wall, and expected to see him there serving drinks, and they found out that he did die in the war in Pearl Harbor. So it's an amazing piece. William Bendix played, the person going back and forth in time, and very powerful. Well, CBS turned it down for whatever reason, said, this isn't going to work. Well, Rod sold it to Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz's production company. So it aired as a Westinghouse, Desilu Playhouse, and it had such critical acclaim. They said over 20,000 letters came into CBS, and they says, okay, Rod, we're going to do your show, The Twilight Zone, but we want a new half-hour pilot. So this is actually the 1-hour pilot. And, it's something that hardly anybody saw unless you were alive to see it live. But they did finally put it on the Blu-ray DVD set a year ago.
Awesome. That's good. He did really write a lot about time traveling. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, I'd say about 15-20% of his work has
Mhm.
to do with time travel in one format or another. So when I'm trying to put together our screen snapshots, 5, 10, 15-second snapshots and make about a 10-minute clip of all of the time travel things in a different way. For example, one that I really liked, the title escapes me, but there's a gentleman that's being hung in the West, and just as the noose drops down to snap his neck, he wakes up in a doctor's office in modern times, so it's been early 60s, and you see the time travel capsule that's there, and he realizes, he's jumped back and forth in time, and he ends up murdering this doctor, and then the police are about to capture him, so he goes back and wants to go back to where he was. And the irony is, just as he goes back in time, the rope drops and he's still hanging.
Oh.
So it was a classic episode. And so one thing I like about that episode is the actual prop for the time travel machine was used in the movie The Fly that was done about 30 years ago. It was the same time travel device.
Oh, wow. That's
So
interesting.
you have Jeff Goldblum. It was a fun film.
Mhm.
So you have excuse me. They actually had two episodes of the Fly. So I love how they recycle props. Because any of the major props that were used in Twilight Zone belong to MGM because that's where they filmed. And the first pilot, the half-hour pilot with Earl Holliman, Where Is Everybody, was filmed at Universal, but then they moved over to MGM and did the whole series. So those props most likely are either still in the prop house someplace, but more than likely they're gone. We haven't been able to track down any major props whatsoever, just a few minor things that, some of them are even in question if those are legitimate. So we're not playing too much into the props that we have accumulated because there's some questions about some of them. So, that's disappointing, but at least some of the props were recycled and used in other famous films.
I wonder what happens to those props. I would suspect that maybe some of the actors take them, or somebody from the set, they just walk with them, or what?
No, because MGM was the leading studio back at the time of Twilight Zone, their props were buildings were just massive. Rod couldn't get many props himself. I can remember him reading and Anne Serling talking about it in her book, the ventriloquist dummy that was used in 2 episodes. And he brought it home one day and sat there at the table playing it when the daughters were really young, Anne and Jody, and they loved it, but they wanted to keep it. And he says, "Kids, I have to take it back. It doesn't belong to me." And so he couldn't even keep that. And the same with the Talkie Tina doll. In a lot of props, he would bring them home, but he'd have to take them back. I did find out, however, there's a teacher at Bing-hamton High School today that I've worked with for 20-some years on the Serling projects, and he's become good friends with both Anne and Jody Serling. And he said they both live in Ithaca area, and he said he was out to Jody's house one day, and ironically he just says, "Is it all right if I use the restroom?" Of course she said, "Yes, it's downstairs to the right." So he says, I go downstairs and I go in, I shut the door, and I look on the wall, and he says, I almost fell over. He says, there are the original 5 masks from the episode called The Masks, where the grandfather was dying at midnight in New Orleans, and he had these voodoo masks, and he had his family put them on, and then they had to keep them on until midnight, and then he dies. And when they take the mask off, their faces were conformed to the ugliness and horrors of what their personalities were really like. So she said she has all 5 of those framed and hanging on the wall. Why in the bathroom? I don't know. But at least
something
we know
to contemplate.
I guess. So we're hoping that someday maybe she'll do a lease with us, or at least bring them for a program, or let us, put them on display for a year or whatever. And then we've also found out that Anne Serling, who did the book, does have the dummy. So, it's so a few things did escape here and there. And the Telly Savalas episode with the doll, the Talkie Tina doll that kills him at the end. Actually, Carol Serling did have it, and she sold the doll to Telly Savalas, who starred in the episode, for $78,000, and this was back in the 70s.
Wow.
So, and, that doll is supposedly so cursed that it's, destroyed the lives of everybody that's ever touched it. And if
so
you
what's
want
the curse? I mean, what do you think caused the curse and the illusion of?
I don't know what supposedly caused it, but if you're familiar or your listeners are with the episode, the doll is purchased for his stepdaughter, and starts talking really nice, and then it starts saying things. Every time he picks it up, like, I don't think I like you anymore, and it ends up saying, I'm going to kill you, and she does. The doll kills him at the end. She pushes him down the steps. So. And June Foray, God bless her, the voice of Talkie Tina, she's the one that did all the voice characters for the cartoons, from Rocky and Bullwinkle to the Flintstones to all of the Warner Brothers cartoons in the 50s. She's 95 now. She just stopped doing celebrity signing shows a year ago, and she sent me a lovely letter and a signed photo about 2 months ago. And she addressed the letter to myself, even though the photo's in the museum, but I kept the letter. It says that she really enjoyed doing the part, even though it was such a small voiceover. But she's more well known for that than her whole 50-year career of, her doing voices.
Amazing.
So we were thrilled to get that. So the story on the doll, there are 3 books out called The Curse of the Twilight Zone, and the first one was just the Curse of the Stars. And the episode talking about Telly Savalas said that he literally went crazy with this doll after he had purchased it. He was living on the penthouse of the Universal Hotel right there at the Universal Studios, the theme park in California. And I had been there, and I met his mother. She was down having breakfast one day, and I knew he lived on the top floor. Well, anyways, they said the last year of his life, he locked himself in. He would not allow any maid service. People would bring a tray of food and knock on his door, and he'd just say, set it down. And they could hear him talking to the doll. But before long, they heard the doll talking back to him, and they were carrying on these hateful conversations where he was trying to destroy the doll, and the doll was going to kill him, and it drove him crazy. And when he passed away, he left it in his will to Frank Sinatra. And same story. Everything was very secretive. During the funeral, somebody had to slip out, go to the estate. They told where it was buried under the floors and how to get this doll, and Frank wanted that doll. And then, the same thing basically with him, that it drove him crazy too. And then on his passing, it went to Don Rickles, who's a good friend of mine and has the doll. And I'm trying to talk him into donating it to us, but I don't know if I want my hands on it or not.
You're going to keep it behind some kind of glass if you do that.
Yeah.
Sounds like it.
Those curses are amazing. The books are fantastic. If your listeners are interested in this type of really bizarre paranormal activity, go to Amazon. They're as low as $7 or $8. Just type in The Curse of the Twilight Zone Stars. And there's 3 volumes. And the stories are absolutely amazing. But what is really fantastic is the documentation for every one. There's even copies of letters from Rod suing a newspaper for talking about the Curse of the Twilight Zone. And he said, you're destroying my ability to hire actors. Nobody wants to work for me anymore.
Wow. Well, how many actors would you estimate were actually affected on some scale in a negative fashion?
Well, I've read all 3 books several times. And there's one on the second volume, I think, is all death by suicide. And there's like 30 or 40 of them.
Wow.
They killed themselves, murdered other people. The third book alone is death by drowning. It is just unbelievable. The first volume, the story that freaked me out the most, and would your listeners too, and I read it at least 10 times, is with President Obama and the CIA and the FBI getting involved with the Bob Crane, Hogan's Heroes, murder. And Bob Crane was, found, murdered in a small motel when he was doing a play. And this whole story involved people. They would be driving in their cars in this one area in Texas or Arizona or whatever state it was, and all of a sudden, all the doors would lock. The radio station would change from whatever you had it on to a station that was Bob Crane's voice. This is 30, 40 years after Bob Crane was dead, telling you that he was going to kill you and everybody in the car, and that it was because of your involvement with pornography. So it really got bizarre, and their cars would start going 100 miles an hour, crash, and kill everybody. Wow. And there were 2 young children that survived the family accidents. And it would start with big band music, and then Bob Crane's voice would come in. Well, it ended up that the motel that they found his body in was the FBI and the CIA came in under orders of President Obama, and this is all documented, and they would set up cameras in there like you would do a ghost search in an old building or whatever. I forget what they call them, ghost hunters and stuff. Mm-hmm. And they literally, every 15 seconds, would get a few frames of Bob Crane sitting at a little table with the shortwave radio doing these broadcasts that were killing people.
Wow.
So they're showing these pictures, and you hear Bob Crane's voice and what was going on. So the government literally imploded the room in the motel. And that was filmed. It was crazy. And ironically, there was one or two policemen that were involved and knew what was going on but didn't say anything to stop it. And they were starting to advertise what was happening. And the last one, right after they imploded the room and stuff, as he was heading home, the same thing happened to him. And he went through the windshield and was beheaded.
Oh, my goodness.
And it's all documented. I mean, I can't believe that they can falsify all of these documents, especially bringing in our president and the government. I mean, it just – so your readers, I mean, if I caught your interest at all, these are well worth a $7 or $8 investment, and get ready for a ride, because it's quite a roller coaster ride to read these things.
It's amazing. So it sounds like when they had these accidents, they were remotely controlled, or they were remotely taken over through some kind of covert technology. What do you think?
I don't know how it was done. It was just done through these radio broadcasts. And like I said, two of the young children, one was a boy about 8 or 9, and one was a girl, maybe 10 or 11, survived the crashes. And everybody in the car, like the mother had been a porn star. And everybody had involvement that was killed in pornography of some sort or another, because that's how Bob Crane was killed.
Right.
It was just an amazing. I'm sure most of your listeners don't know Hogan's Heroes, let alone who he is or the story behind it. But it's fascinating, and there was another one about an actress that after the Twilight Zone, she started working on a treasure hunter's ship, and they would take tours out and stuff, and a hurricane or something come up, and the thing crashed, and everybody was lost at sea. And first it started with her death, and she was buried along the coast, the Atlantic coast. And then this incident with the ship that she had worked on took place, and the hurricane, when it hit the United States on the New York City side, flooded these graves, and her coffin was seen floating down the river for miles and miles and went out to sea. And when they brought the ship up, her body was on the coffin, and her body was on that ship that sunk thousands of miles away.
Wow, this is bizarre.
It's stuff I hadn't planned to talk about, but it is Serling connection, because he was afraid of this curse, especially in the late 60s, and then when it really hit night gallery time, he says, I can't hire anybody anymore.
Wow. They just got spooked, I bet. And let's talk about that story where when he died, the night he died, wasn't there like a black cloud or something? Yeah,
when Rod Serling passed away, June 28, 1975, it was in Rochester, New York, Strong Memorial Hospital, and he had his third and massive heart attack during 10-hour bypass surgery. And the owner of the museum actually had talked to somebody that had worked there at the time, and said that a black cloud just enveloped it, lowered right over the hospital. Nobody could see the hospital building at all. You couldn't see out. And it was just a very bizarre circumstance. And I actually had a chance to talk to one of the nurses that wheeled Rod from his room into the OR the day of the surgery. And I had called the hospital when I was president of the foundation in '87 here in Binghamton, and I said, is anybody there that worked with Rod? And I was lucky enough to get this one nurse, and she told me that Rod was such a smoker that they actually let him have a cigarette right before they wheeled him into the OR. And, I'm sure they had a big part in his not surviving.
Mm-hmm.
He was smoking 4 or 5 packs a day. He, by his own admission, he was a caffeine-aholic, just, coffee all the time, heavy into alcohol, and it all took its toll.
Mm-hmm.
And, what a tragedy to die at 50 years old. Of course, his father had dropped dead suddenly at 52 when Rod was in the war, so there was heart problems in the family too. But for such a genius to have to die so young, but of course he's one of hundreds that nobody has a say.
Right.
When it's our time, and I just wish he had lived to to see. He died not knowing that he was really popular.
Oh gosh, he's affected so many generations of people. That's what's so interesting, and it's his message is really deep because even though there might have been a curse associated or some kind of a strange anomalous energy, he had some real depth in his writing, and every episode had a really strong message. I mean, I can't think of one person who hasn't really gotten into the old Twilight Zone episodes.
Yeah, it's amazing. His foresight. Everybody says, where did he come up with his ideas? Nobody knows. God knows, and he knows, because that's it. Yes, he would, read a lot of pulp fiction and sci-fi magazines as a kid, and the comic books, and base some of his ideas on them, but not to the point that he would write the twist endings that he's so famous for, and the depth of the material in there. For most of your listeners that are really fans of the series, it's well known that he stopped writing for major dramatic television because of censorship in the 50s, where, they'd say, well, you can't use that word or sentence. You can't say that, a young girl has her leg in a brace and things from Paul. The censorship was amazing. One episode, they said you can't use Coca-Cola bottles on the shelf because it designates racism and bigotry in the South. I mean, you can't use toilet paper in the scene because, you can't use that in the presence of mine enemies. One of the sponsors was a gas company for stoves for your home. And they said, you can't mention gas chambers. We're a gas company.
Oh, brother, man.
How bad the censorship guy. So Rod had a famous show he did, the Mike Wallace interview, in about 1957 or 8. And when confronted with, why are you quit writing for major dramatic television? He says, I'm not. He says, I'm going to a format of science fiction and fantasy because in that genre, I can say what I want to and not be censored. And he says, what do you mean? He says, well, if I have an alien on another planet saying my words that I can't use as a Republican or a Democrat or whatever, talking in the episode, I can get away with it. And of course he did. He said, everything he wanted to say, he got said by putting it in a different time and in a different reference point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was pretty smart on his end. There's no doubt about that. Yeah, he seemed to have had a haunted life to some degree. I know he had a lot of trauma when he was in the military. I think he had a lot of nightmares. Didn't he suffer from nightmares?
Yes, he was. He had wounds to both knees, his left wrist, and his one eye. And he spent a month in Manila just in therapy. And that's where he said in some of his letters that he took up writing as a form of therapy. Mm-hmm. So, he probably would not have been a writer if he had not, suffered some of those wounds. But, I mean, some of the horrors of war that he saw, his best friend being beheaded when they were dropping crates of food they hadn't eaten in 7 days, and this young man, Mark Levy, was running out there, and all of a sudden they were started to get shelling this plane helicopter, and they started dropping crates without the parachutes. And one of the crates landed on his friend, and he was beheaded. Mm-hmm. And Rod saw this, and the whole troop did, and they were traumatized. And Rod went over, they dug a grave, and they buried him there. And Rod made a Star of David out of twigs and placed it there and had a little service for him. So, he saw the horrors of war firsthand. He should have been killed. He was face to face with an enemy about 20 feet in front of him, looking down the barrel. And just as he was about to be shot and killed, because of Rod's height at 5'4.5", a buddy come up behind him, put his rifle over Rod's right shoulder and shot and took out the enemy. Mm-hmm. So Rod was close to death that way. And because of those experiences, he also was a war hero. I can remember in the last days of the war, he was in Manila. And they started to be shelled, and they were all out in this public square watching a play. And there was a young girl, 16 years old, on stage, and she panicked, and Rod actually jumped up on stage, grabbed her, pulled her down, and took her to safety and saved her life. So, he was great that way, too. So, do we have a break coming right up?
Actually, not until the end. Do you need a break? Because I can.
No. I didn't know if you did have Let me hit you with a couple of quotes that we unearthed recently from different things I found on the internet. It says, being like everybody is the same as being nobody.
Nice.
And this one is really interesting. For civilization to survive, the human race has to remain civilized.
Indeed.
And if he only saw us today.
Oh, gosh.
This one is fun because it says, if you need drugs to be a good writer, you are not a good writer. Now,
There
this
you
is
go.
from 1970, from an interview that I found. And he was also asked at the same time if he'd ever used marijuana. And this is where the quote came from. He says, "No, I never have." And ironically, and this is something I probably shouldn't say, but we actually found 3 professional photographs that were hired in May, a month before he died. They were the last professional photographs ever taken. And the third one shows Rod smoking a joint. And it's a hysterical photo because I put it on display in the museum and it stayed up for 6 months. And under the caption, I did not put anything about that. But everybody would just hush and say, "He's smoking a joint, he's smoking marijuana," you know. And so his pain level at that point was so severe. And it also, back in 1970, when he was asked that question, he said it has not yet been proven whether marijuana is harmful to the body or not. So, nobody can fault the guy for, if he had that level of pain. Look, they just legalized it here in Binghamton a couple of months ago now. They sell it a mile from my house at a mall.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it's just funny to watch the people's reactions because you can see that it's a big, wide rolled piece, curved, and you don't have to tell nobody nothing. They just start whispering, "Look, look, look, look," But I have taken it down, but I think I'll put it back up. It's
that's funny.
It's part of his life. It's part of his history, and certainly nobody can fault him for it.
No, and everything's, pretty much they're legalizing that everywhere. I know my state's legal too. So there's a lot of that going on. Yeah, everywhere.
Yeah. There's another quote that I like here. It says, "Every man is put on earth condemned to die. Time and method of execution unknown."
That's a good one.
So, I mean, those are just fun little things that we've unearthed recently. And
That's
I like
great.
to share with some people.
I'm sure you'll get some more at some point. You'll probably be revealing other things that are just going to come creeping out of the woodwork. One of my favorite episodes was the one with Agnes Moorehead with the UFO, the little miniature UFO.
That was called The Invaders.
I love that.
Very interesting about that episode. She was a classically trained actress. Her father was a Baptist preacher. She well known for Endora, the mother on Bewitched, with Elizabeth Montgomery. And so when she was given the script, and Rod wrote a lot of scripts, but he did not write this one. But he does say it's one of the favorite episodes of the series that he had not written. She does no talking. There's no talking in the show by her character. And it turns out that she didn't know really how to portray this character without talking. So she trained with the world-famous mime Marcel Marceau for several weeks to learn mime and was able to pantomime and do a classic performance in that show. Another interesting aspect from Rod's point of view about the show, he feels it's one of the worst filmed episodes because it's so blatantly obvious that the little characters that you thought they were the aliens. It turns out that she was like a 10, 20-foot person, and our American astronauts were these little 5-inch characters. And they were just little cutout things on a string, and you could see them being moved around. Well, if it was that blatant to Rod when the show aired in the early 60s, imagine what it would be on a big screen today.
Right. Well, it didn't affect me like that because when I saw that episode, I assumed that was just that actually their space program was just miniature. It was like a test program for UFOs that we created that, and we created these miniature versions of things to attack people. But who knows? I mean, that's just the way I saw it when I first watched it.
No, according to Rod, there are life-size astronauts, and she's the giant.
Wow, that's pretty cool. I don't know how many people know that. Probably everybody but me, really. But
no, your point is very well taken. You can easily see that watching the show for the first time. But, his notes and things that are in the books, the Martin Graham's book, 800 pages, Unlocking the Doors to a Television Classic, that's still available. It's just an amazing piece. We had Martin at our last show last October, and I think I'd mentioned to you on one of your shows, Nick Parisi with his new book on Rod Serling. Mm-hmm. We had thought it would be out for Christmas, but it's not. But the good news is I got a letter from him just a few days ago, an email, and the book is 1,200 pages of manuscript. Don't know how it's going to translate page-wise to a book, depending on what size they do the book. But for the first time in history, Anne Serling, Rod's daughter, and her new publication company is printing the book. Awesome. The Serling estate has never endorsed or allowed anything about Rod to ever be written. And she's so fascinated. The book title is Dimensions of Imagination, The Complete Rod Serling Companion.
Oh, I love it.
So it's supposed to be out in June. June 28th is the date of Rod's passing. We do a program on that date, and if the book does indeed come out right before then, he'll be there doing a book signing, the first one here. But once the book is done and things, I will contact you.
Yes.
And we'll get them online.
Excellent.
I thought maybe the first time him and I together, like we've done on a couple of shows, and where you can play off of each other, and that's a lot of fun because you've got both of our different perspectives at once on the same questions.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And then we got to get him on the circuit because, like I said, he made major breakthrough with Ann Serling to be printing this book.
Oh, yeah.
For the longest time, he said, you can't tell anybody, but I called him a few days ago, and he said, yes, please go ahead, and that he's anxious to start publicizing the book. He's come up with some amazing, he's crisscrossed the country for a couple of years. He has read over 225 strips of Rod Serling, almost everything that's known to have been written. He found one strip that I'll talk to you about for a second that just blew me away. If you remember the episode, It's a Good Life with the Unbilled Mummy, is little Anthony, who wishes you into the cornfield.
Oh, that's my favorite. Yeah, that was a good one too. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Rod in 1974-5 wrote a theatrical script. He wanted to bring that to the motion pictures, and it is so drastic a change of writing for Rod Serling. And what I mean by that is Nick told us for about a 15-minute stint at one of my programs that it is filled with graphic violence. And it starts with Anthony's birth. He said the only thing he did not like was the way it ended, but he said that even the first day when little Anthony is born in the hospital, he kills his uncle. He has all of his teeth and long hair, and he talks, feed me, feed me, feed me, and his uncle comes in and he doesn't like him, and the baby throws him off the window and kills him. There's a cop that he doesn't like, and he cuts his legs off on the street. The lady organist in church, he says, I don't like your music. And he puts this giant rat on top of the organ, 3-4 foot tall. And he says, if you don't play my music, my rat is going to eat you. And Rod was taking a whole new genre of writing. He wanted to be a major motion picture writer for, the last 20 years of his life, and it never happened. Yes, The Planet of the Apes was a classic. 7 Days in May, The Man with James Earl Jones being the first American black president. There were some great films that Rod wrote, but he never achieved the screenwriter for motion picture status that he wanted. And so because of the way that the films were going in 74-5 with graphic violence and horror, Rod wrote this really amazing script. And I says, I don't even want to know the ending until your book comes out. So I don't even know how it ends. But he said he thought the ending was disappointed. But he said, you're not going to believe the graphic violence that Rod wrote. I didn't know he had that in him to write that type of material. And I don't think if it wasn't for the fact that he really wanted to pursue a big screenwriting career, that, you go to what is in the market at the time, and that's what it was.
Right. And what's your favorite episode?
My favorite episode, it goes back to Night of the Meek with Art Carney as the drunken Santa Claus. And
that's a good one.
On several aspects. Number one, I love Art Carney as an actor. I thought he was brilliant. It was one of the 5 or 6 episodes that were done live as a kinescope on video and not filmed. This got to be a major problem because the studio, even though Rod Serling owned half of it, Cayuga Production Companies, and CBS owned the other half of Twilight Zone, they were always fighting him to cut costs down. And they says, well, let's try going to a sound stage and do some of these live on video. It'll save us a lot of money. Now, most of the episodes cost $40,000 to $80,000 to do at that time, and they thought it would save $30,000 or $40,000. Ironically, it cost the same $40,000 to $80,000, and they were lousy because you had just a set. You didn't have the props. You didn't have the quality because the kinescope looked very grainy and lines in it and stuff. So there's no real good prints, although on the DVD sets they've cleaned it up pretty good. But I just love the idea of the Drunken Santa Claus, when he's asked, why do you drink? And he says it's because of humanity the way it is. He says, I can't stand walking down the street and seeing these children with no homes and living in orphanages and no gifts. And he says, all I want to do is give everything I can to everybody. And he said, that's why he drinks. He was weeping for society. Mm-hmm. So, the episode had a lot to say. And I'm also a sucker for a good Christmas show, which I think I sent you the Christmas for Sweeney, didn't I?
You did, and I love that one.
Yeah.
That was awesome. Thank you for doing that. That's really
for your listeners. Christmas for Sweeney is actually the first thing that Rod ever sold to television in 1950, although it aired as the second thing he wrote. And Bruce Tabbitt, the star, Bruce Tabbitt is famous for the original King Kong movie. And he was a big actor in the 30s and 40s. And somehow he heard about this script, and he actually paid Rod Serling $50. Rod had the check from him when he sold him the script. And then it was sold to a show called Stars Over Hollywood that aired Christmas of 1950. But actually, the second piece Rod wrote became the first one aired, same series, Stars Over Hollywood, Grady Everett for the People, a political thriller where the mayor or governor or whatever candidate he was ends up murdering somebody at the end. And, tough politics, a real hard sell. And that actually was the first thing that Rod aired. And Rod was paid $100 for that script. But I love the Christmas for Sweeney. Mm-hmm. I found that about 1978 in a film package I bought. And when I saw the end credits written by Rod Serling, as I got to know Carol Serling, his widow, I called her, and she says, Rod never wrote anything like that. I'd remember that. And I says, well, he did write it. And I said, I'll send you a VHS. So I did. And she wrote me a letter back, which we still have. And it says, please don't ever show this to anybody. She said, this is such garbage, terrible writing. I don't want this thing to be seen or be known that it was Rod's. And his teacher, Helen Foley, that was the founder of our Rod Serling Memorial Foundation here in Bing-hamton, also said, you can't show this. And I says, well, guess what? I'm doing my first film festival in November, and I'm showing it. And I did. I says, this was an amazing piece to find.
Oh, yeah.
To show you how amazing this was, the Paley Center had done in 1985 a 10-page booklet on everything that Rod Serling supposedly wrote and on his life and career. And they never heard of this. This was not, a matter of fact, a lot of pieces that I unearthed on film, they never heard of and did not have, and still don't. Although I did trade them this and one other early 50s piece, back in the 80s. And then the last trade we tried to do, they reneged and didn't give me what they had promised us. So that ends that. But, that's how rare this thing was. It's a Serling family, never heard of it. And I think it's, it certainly isn't his best writing, but it's not his worst either.
No, I thought it was good. I liked it.
And if you remember the very first scene in the thing with the young children out caroling in front of this diner, you had a couple of young black children.
Right.
And Rod Serling was the first person to ever use black people in television. And not only that, but as you get into Twilight Zone, he was the first one to put them in starring roles. Rod Serling hated bigotry. He hated racism. I mean, he just had no tolerance for it whatsoever. Mm-hmm. And I was so glad that, he really stuck to his guns and did a lot of things like that. And a matter of fact, Frank Sinatra was the same way. When he was touring with Sammy Davis and stuff, they wouldn't even allow Sammy Davis to stay in the same hotels with the rest of the Rat Pack and stuff. And Frank says, well, goodbye, we're not doing your show.
Wow.
And, he held his hand and held firm. And Sammy Davis is one of the finest entertainers we've ever had.
Mm-hmm. It's hard. I guess it's my timeline because, I wasn't exposed to a lot of that, but I guess there was a lot of that going on with racism back then too, huh?
Yeah, definitely. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you look at the Oscar situation, Hattie McDaniels was the first lady to get one for Gone with the Wind. And then there was not another black actor won until Sidney Poitier in the 60s. Mm-hmm. And then not again until Whoopi Goldberg. I mean, it just, so that's why they were boycotting this year's Oscars very heavily, because there was no nominations for any black actors, writers, directors, anything. And actually, I watched the Oscars, and that Chris Rock was amazing because he handled it so well. And he says, you can't fault no nominations. They're just the roles weren't there. The scripts weren't there. If they deserved a nomination, they would have had them. So I was so glad that he really held his guns and came and hosted the show.
Mm-hmm.
It says, look, you can't fault the system. You got to fault there were no good performances, in those areas. So I'm glad. I hate to think that type of bigotry still goes on, but I'm sure it does someplace.
Right. I'd like to see everything settle down where there's none of this race war spiking that's coming up. I'm sure you've kind of observed some of that. It just seems like we're on a very destructive course right now in America. I kind of touched on that a little bit, and I think maybe there was something foreboding about the Twilight Zone episodes. I think he kind of saw that. I think he kind of saw the flaws in humanity and the conflicts that were there.
Yeah, he definitely did, and that's why so many of the episodes dealt with all the various themes of bigotry, hatred, just craziness.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think at the point I did your show last that we had a tie-in with the Serling family to Area 51.
Oh, heck no. I don't think we talked about this.
No, because this just came up, I'm going to say about 3-4 months ago. I found a book on eBay, and it said it was written by Rod Serling. It says, The Only Way to Fly, 1976, dedicated to the memory of my brother Rod, which was inside. But they advertised his book for sale like Rod had written it. Well, Robert Serling, his 8-year elder brother, was a famous writer. He wrote The President's Plane is Missing. But he was a leading world authority on airplanes. So this book is actually, I got it very cheap, like $7, $8. Nobody knew what it was. So I knew instantly from the way he wrote it that Robert wrote it and what it was. And this is the story of American Airlines, who at that time was our leading thing. But inside was an inscription that says, For Frank and Ann Powers, with admiration, esteem, and my most personal regards, R.J. Serling. So once I saw Frank Powers, I knew what this was about. Do you know the name Frank Powers?
I'm not familiar with it.
Okay, Francis Gary Powers was a famous Cold War U-2 pilot whose plane was shot down in a covert mission over the Soviet Union in the late 50s. And what's interesting was, I knew that part of the history, but Francis Powers stayed a prisoner of war over there for years until LBJ, 10 years later, did a swap and we got him released. But there was this new plane that had been secretly invented, and it was based in Area 51, and there was like 10 pilots that were being flown in on a small plane to learn how to fly this covert plane so we could do our spying over the Soviet Union. Well, that plane crashed just as they were coming in for a landing, and they were all killed. So now it came that the only person qualified enough to learn about how to fly this plane was Francis Powers. So they brought him in, and he trained. And on the very first mission, a ground-to-air missile exploded behind the plane at 30,000 feet. He was able to bail out at that height, and after surviving the jump, he was captured as a spy until he was released in 1962. And we had to give up the KGB spy, Rudolph Abel, to be able to get him back. But so, it's interesting. And, the Area 51, there's, so much going on with the UFOs and all the stories and that famous alien body that's supposed to be there and was dissected on camera and stuff. All those films are on YouTube and stuff. So now we actually have his brother Robert, being good friends, and and that's quite a thing to say, with admiration, esteem, and my most personal regard. So we were able to tie in the Serling family, even though it's not Rod, but we were able to tie that into Area 51. So that's a lot of fun. There's a Francis Powers Museum. There is part of the plane. I think they found the props and stuff of the plane that's still on display at the museum in Area 51. And so it's fun when we can tie in, the Serlings to something that's such a popular thing. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you and I had ever talked. I mean, I've done like 15 of these shows, and I don't remember who I say to what, but if I get new information, I like to share it. And I had two major UFO experiences myself. And one was in 1969 right here in town. I was at my uncle's house, which is right on IBM's country club here, and the world base is headquarters for IBM is right here. And it was Halloween, of course, so that makes it unbelievable, but this really happened. And there's about 12 of us and the minister getting out. We're going to a Halloween party. And right over the golf course appeared this V formation of 6, 7, 8 weird spacecrafts. They were all shaped like V's, and they were all flying in a V formation, but they lowered themselves right down almost above the ground, just like a hovercraft would be, and they just sat there for a few seconds, and then they were gone, and they were gone instantly. And what was unique is we went into the house to call the police, and they said the phones are ringing off the hooks. We're getting hundreds of calls. The next day of the newspaper, that same formation was seen coast to coast within a 5-minute period.
What year was this again?
1969.
Wow.
And then I was coming home from Columbus, Ohio, mid to late 70s, and I used to always travel the highways. And for some reason, I decided to take a route through about 90 miles of very rough mountainous road to save some mileage on my car. But it was the worst thing I ever did because it was like midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning. And as I got into the middle of this mountain range, I saw these weird lights above me and colored multi-lights blinking, and they lowered behind me. And this was literally a saucer-type vehicle. And that damn thing followed me for like 50 miles through these major curves. I'm going 90, 100 miles an hour. Luckily, I didn't get killed. And I don't have any time lapses of memory or anything like that. But it just scared the heck out of me. And I'll never forget it. I mean, it's like in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where they were following him the same way. And,
right. And what year was that one?
That was mid to late 70s.
Okay, so
and believe me, all the rest of my travels were on highways.
Really?
Late at night.
See, it's the Twilight Zone following you. That's really interesting. Not many people have that. Most people don't encounter a UFO. They really don't. So.
There was a third situation that happened here about 30 miles out with my father's oldest brother, and he had a big farm. And this was written up in the newspapers too, but I don't know if anybody has any copies of it. But it had one of the grass formations where the saucer landed and burnt all the grass and stuff in the circular formation and stuff. And he literally claims that he went out and an alien came off the ship and talked to him. And really got into things and wanted him to go with him, and he didn't. For whatever reason, they didn't make him. And, I don't believe – my uncle was a good Christian man. I don't believe he could make up anything like this. Plus, he had all the photographs of all the circular grass being burned there and formations that you see all the time. And that's one of the earliest. That had to be back in the earlier 60s.
Wow.
So who knows? I don't rule it out. Being brought up in a fundamental Christian church, I don't rule out that there's no way that if there's a God like I believe there is, that he created one planet and one race of people. Mm-hmm. There's got to be millions of planets out there and millions of planets filled with people like us. They might look different, talk different, whatever. So there's no way that anybody can say to me, well, the Bible doesn't teach that there's alien life or other life anywhere else, but it doesn't not teach it either.
Exactly. I think that's well said. Yeah. Well, it's very interesting. We're just about ready to wrap this up in a few minutes here, Mike. I want to give you the option to make sure you let everybody know how to get in touch with you and also how to access that website again so that if they want to go by the museum, they can. I want to thank you so much for joining us. It's such a pleasure to communicate with you. I really enjoy hearing your stories. You're awesome.
Well, I thank you. I enjoy sharing them, and especially when I get something new like I was able to about the Underground Railroad to Canada. I thought that was just amazing, and that's not even a week old that I discovered that. So, yes, please check us out. RodSerlingArchive.org is our website. RodSerlingArchive@gmail.com comes right to me. If you contact me, I put your name on a mailing list, so when I do a newsletter, we can send it out. Telling about new acquisitions and our programs that are going on. And then we're housed at the Bundy Museum in Bing-hamton, New York. They were basically the founders of IBM Corporation when they invented the time clock recording clocks back in the 1880s. The museum is very active. We purchased 3 new buildings in the last 6 months. So now it's going to be the Bundy Museum Complex. We're no longer 3 buildings, we're 6. We have many new major exhibits opening up in the next couple of months. And so if you're in the Binghamton area, stop in and see us. We're open every day. The exhibits are free. The Serling exhibit is always free, and any of our programs, anything we've ever done or will do concerning Rod Serling remains free. So the Bundy Museum has a great website too, just bundymuseum.org. And it's well worth checking out. And I said, for those that have to fly in and out of New York City, we're 160 miles upstate. Come and see us. You won't be disappointed. We have things going on, 7 days a week there.
That sounds so awesome. If I'm ever up in your neighborhood, I'm going to poke my head in and say hi.
Yeah. I'd love to have you.
Yeah, I'd love it. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight. I hope you enjoyed, Mike. I certainly did. And please stay tuned for Shiny Side Out with David Dunger and Mickey coming up next, of course, to sail you on into the night from Down Under, as they always do with their excellent show over there. I think we have 2 minutes plus or minus. What about you, Mike? You're a very interesting person. Are you going to write a biography about you? A book?
I have been asked to because of my celebrity stories. As I mentioned, I've known over 100 celebrities, a lot of big name people, and I think I've shared a couple of Bill Cosby story and Sandy Duncan. And everybody as I talk says, Mike, you've got to get this down in a book. Well, I'm not a good writer, but I think I would be willing to sit with a video camera and talk like I'm talking to you, and then get a ghostwriter to write it, because not only do I like to tell them, but I can document a lot of it with photos and letters from the stars too. And so that makes it nice that, I can prove I'm not just sitting here making up these stories.
Yeah, exactly. I like the historian aspect of you. You're actually preserving material, and I think that's fantastic. That, a lot of people will censor things or they'll erase it, but you're actually preserving things, especially with the Rod Serling Museum.
I'll tell you very briefly, when you get me on again, let's take about 10 minutes and tell you about a new exhibit that's coming up on local history that has to do with a friend of mine that got me in the film business. He was a photographer for newsreels, so I can tell you stories about Lindbergh crashing nearby, Presidents Teddy Roosevelt, FDR, Wendell Willkie, who ran against FDR campaigning. The photos I've seen are amazing, and the videos, and will be fascinating for your listeners.
Oh, well, definitely we're going to touch base on that one, and you will be back without a doubt. I have you scheduled again, and I want to thank you again, Mike. It's been awesome always, and you take care of that cough.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Have a great week, everybody.